everyone. Welcome to another edition of Valley Sports Rewind. I'm Mike Cannici, and I'm honored today. Ansonia, you know all about the town, you know all about their sports, and they've had a tremendous football program. But for the last 35 to 40 years, their baseball program can match anybody in the state. And we're joined by their longtime head coach, Mr. 500 himself, Coach Mike Vacca. And Coach, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Coach, let me ask you, when did a love for baseball begin for you? How old would you say you were?
Well, basically, when I started, and I played all the way through Little League, Babe Ruth in high school, and then I got the urge for some reason to start coaching when I was 17. I decided not to play Legion that year, and I became a Little League coach at 17. I don't know if I was old enough. The players on the team were 12. I was only 5 years older, but the commissioner said, "Oh, we'll give it a shot," and I just stayed with it. I did it for I'd say about 5-6 years at the Little League level. While I was in college, pretty much, I just had finished my senior year of high school, and that's when the love of the sport was always there.
Right. Now, let me ask you, as a kid, did you play all sports, or was baseball the one that you loved the most even as a kid?
Now, I played 3 sports my whole life. And then in high school, I was able to play, I played 3 sports for my freshman and my sophomore year. And then my junior and senior year, I just focused on football and on baseball.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, you probably were fortunate enough to play for Coach Jarvis at least a couple years. Am I right? Or
he was the only coach there was in Ansonia.
Right.
He coached us in basically all the sports. When I was playing, he was the football coach, obviously, for all 4 years, and he was the baseball coach. In basketball, at that time, he had retired from that, and Dave Wright was the coach.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably had you were probably fortunate enough to play with Jack Hunt in football, correct? Did you play with Jack when you were in high school?
Jack Hunt was the left tackle when I was the left halfback.
Right.
We were on the same team, and he was a dominant player. He was a giant at that time. He just towered over everyone, and we knew he was going to go on to great things. So he went on to play Division I football at Wichita State.
Right. And you were the class of what, 64? Am I correct?
I was in 64. Jack was in class of 65.
Right. So you graduated with Coach Del Volpe, if I'm not mistaken, correct? He was your quarterback?
No, he was a sophomore.
He was a sophomore.
Yeah.
Okay. That's right. He was 66.
He was on the team. He was he was the quarterback the next year. The quarterback on our team was another outstanding athlete, Frank Oshesky. He coached the team. He actually was the quarterback for 3 years. He coached. He was the quarterback for his sophomore, junior, and senior year. He graduated with me in 64.
Right. And what was sports like for Ansonia back then? Because Ansonia has always been a rich tradition of sports, but was the football program big back then, even, back in 63, 64?
The football team has always been big in Ansonia. We were kind of like told about the things in the past going back to the 20s and the 30s. They were just legendary players all the way up 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Ansonia was always a dominant team. I remember in the 60s was my sophomore year, just a flashback.
Right.
Stanford was the number 1 team in the state, and they were massive. They came in and they marched around Nolan Field. They had 100 players. They were number 1 in the state, and they were just one high school in a city of 100,000.
Right.
At that time. And we're 19,000 people. And they came into Nolan Field, and we had an awesome team that year, and we shut them out 20-0.
Wow.
I'll never forget it.
Wow. And if I'm not mistaken, since you were a running back, I would say your primary coach was Frankie Alu. Am I correct? I know he did a lot with the D-backs, but he was definitely probably your running backs coach, correct?
Definitely. We had an offense staff was awesome. Coach Jarvis was the head coach, and then he had two unbelievable assistants that could have been head coaches anywhere, Dave Wright and Frankie Alu.
Right. And, Frank Alu ended up going to Derby, but anybody I ever talked to that went to Ansonia that played for him still loves him to this day. I mean, they had such admiration for the man.
He was a tremendous running back. We heard from in the 40s for Ansonia, and he had a love for the city. And he coached in Ansonia for quite a few years before going to Derby. Believe me, that was a big loss for Ansonia, losing Frank Alu.
Right. So tell me, what was baseball like back then when you played? I mean, was the baseball team popular? I mean, back then I know, again, football was always the dominant sport, but how was baseball back then when you played?
Well, football was the dominant sport. The other sports, basketball and baseball, they had good years and then years not so good. But when I played in high school, there was some talent, boy, in baseball. They had some talented players, stud players. And see, the difference there was back then there was only one team, a varsity team for seniors, juniors, sophomore, and freshmen.
Right.
Now we have a varsity team. We have a JV team. We have a freshman team. There's development.
Right.
Back then, if there was no development. It was really not the way it should have been, but that was just the start of things. Ansonia really took off in baseball when Jim Finucane became the coach.
Right. And Jim was a very good coach as well.
Outstanding.
Right. And let me ask you, though, you're always going to be known for baseball, but when you were in high school, was there a sport that you preferred over the other between football and baseball, or did you like them equally?
Really, I like all sports, but I would have to say that I liked football and baseball equally.
Right. And now what position did you play for baseball when you were in high school?
Well, I was a catcher, but eventually there was a catcher below me that was much better than I was, Steve Sokol. So They moved me to the outfield, and I played in the outfield.
Right. Let me ask you now, you get out of high school and you said you started coaching Legion, this and that. When would you say you first came on? Did you start as an assistant for Ansonia before you became the head coach for the JVs and stuff, or how did that come about?
The way it developed was Jim Finucane became the coach of Ansonia baseball in 1969.
Right.
And then in 1971, they decided they had a varsity team, they had a JV team. They were going to start a freshman team.
Right.
So Jim asked me to be the freshman coach.
Oh, so basically you were their first ever freshman coach.
The freshman coach. The program started in 1971. And at that time, Sean Supp was the JV coach, who later became the athletic director of Ansonia High School. And Jim was the varsity coach. And then Sean was also a basketball coach.
Right.
He eventually became the head coach at Seymour High School. And then he came back to Ansonia to be the AD. And then I moved up as the JV coach. So I coached the freshmen and the JVs for 7 years. And then in 1977, Jim Finucane ran for mayor.
Right.
And I became the mayor of the city. And that was it.
Right. It's hard to believe, Coach. I'm 40 now, and you became the coach in 77, and I was 1 year old, and it's hard to believe it's been that long. We're going to talk more about your career, but let me ask you, are you surprised how quick it's went? You started in 77. I'm sure you can remember things from that first year.
Well, the first year was actually the spring of 78.
Right.
Because Jim became mayor in 77, and then that was in November. He took office in December, and at that time, the position was a part-time position.
Right.
So I thought, Jim would just stay as the coach. Everything would be fine. But he decided, nope, he wanted to be full-time mayor, and that was it.
Right.
So in 78, it happened so fast. It was like in February, that I was appointed as the coach, and we had to start practice in March.
Right.
But I had been there for 7 years.
So the kids knew you.
Yeah, so it wasn't something that was just thrown out there. But I'll tell you, that was 78, and now it's 2017. That's 40 years as the varsity coach. All I could say is it flew by.
Right.
Flew by, because you coached in the decade of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and into the 2000s, where we are now.
Right. And I'm sure you had to adjust a little bit because times have changed. You know, the kids from the 70s, the kids from the 80s are different from the kids from the 70s. Same thing with the 90s. And now you see today, I mean, baseball has expanded a lot. I mean, there's all these leagues these kids play in, which when you became head coach, Legion and Babe Ruth, that was probably about it. And now you've got all these fall baseball, everything.
Oh, it's a lot more time consuming now than ever.
Right.
Because of basically they're playing baseball 3 seasons. You're playing in the fall, you're playing in the spring, and you're playing in the summer. The winter is the only time you're not. And then this year, they started, this past year, a winter league in West Haven that we were in. So it was like all year.
Right.
4 seasons. Unbelievable. It just never stops. But those 40 years, I could tell you, just flew by. There's no way. I'm 40 years older now, but it flew by.
Right. And your first year as a head coach, who did you have on your staff as far as coaches that first year?
Well, the first year, actually, a man that was also the freshman coach, he came up and became the JV coach with me, was John Gentile.
Okay.
And John went on to
become a principal
of schools, and then he became like an assistant superintendent up in Seymour.
Right.
And very knowledgeable man. And the thing about John is then when he had to leave to become a principal, he stayed with the program, coaching the catchers and coaching the hitters. So he's still with the program right now. He's been with us every year. He's a volunteer coach, and he's been there all that time.
Right. Now, let me ask you, I think state playoffs were fairly new when you became the head coach. They didn't really come into existence till, the early 70s, if I'm correct. That could be wrong.
No, 71 was the first year that they went to 4 state class champions, double L, L, M, and S.
Right.
Just the way it is now. It hasn't changed since 71. Before 71, they just picked a smaller number of teams. There was no classification. It wasn't good.
Right.
I can't really remember too much about that because it wasn't a big thing, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But 71 started it with all the classifications, and it's exactly the way it is now as it was then.
Right. Now, let me ask you, did you have to win 10 games back then, or what did you have to do to qualify for the state tournament when you started coaching?
Well, it's something that you asked that. It was 50%. You had to win 50% of your games. Then, I believe it was in the early 90s, they had a vote among all the coaches in the state, because I know that head of all the coaches at the time was the coach at Naugatuck, Joe Boyko, and we did a survey on should we lower it to 40%, and the high school coaches in Connecticut voted over 80%. No, not to lower it to 40%. Stay at the 50%.
Right.
But the problem was that girls softball went to 40%, and the state didn't want the girls at 40% and the boys at 50%. So even though the coaches voted like 82% to stay at 50%, which is, I feel, legit, they said no. So we started going. That didn't take place until, I believe, the late 90s. It didn't come
in 99, maybe.
It might have been 99, because I remember in 97, we were 9-11. In the last game, we lost 2-1, and we didn't go to the tournament.
Right.
And so the 50% rule was still in 96, so 99, like you said.
Right.
So that's been the rule ever since. But
And you're not in favor of the 40%. Really.
no, I am not.
Right.
Then, I have mixed feelings because a friend of mine is coaching right now this year at Foreign High School. Foreign is 7-13. 7-13, and they qualified because they weren't at 80%, but the CAC changed the rule last year that they wanted no buys. So they were going to take the top 32 teams in every class, and they happen to be number 32, even with only 7 wins.
Right.
But now they go into the tournament, and they're ranked number 32. They go on the road. They beat the number 1 team
Oh, wow.
on Tuesday, and then Wednesday they beat the number 9 team. So now they're in the quarterfinals.
At 9-13. Yeah.
But they come from the SCC.
Yes.
Which
is tough.
The most probably the strongest league in the state. So good for them because of the competition that they play. Their 7-13 is not really 7-13 because of the teams that they're playing, the caliber.
Right, and I also think too, baseball is so different than football and basketball because football and basketball, most of the time, if you have the most talented team, you're going to get it done. But in baseball, it's all about pitching. So if your pitcher is on, and you're playing a number 1 or number 2 seed, if your pitcher's on, you could win the game. I mean, there's no guarantee. You see it in Major League Baseball. Best team doesn't always win all the time because it all comes down to pitching.
You hit it right on the head. We say that all the time to our players. In football, the better team is going to win most of the time. In basketball, the same thing. In baseball, that is not the case. In baseball, anything could happen. There's too many variables, too many. Pitching, are they pitching their number 1 pitcher? Is it their number 2? Is it their number 3? Things that could happen, crazy things like on the field, with errors or
and
whatever.
There's no clock in baseball, so
no, that's what I love about the game, and I tell them a lot that if we were playing, let's say we had a big record and we were playing a team that had a very down record this year.
Right.
In most other sports, the game's over pretty much before it starts. In baseball, it's not over, and I tell them, look in the dugout. Do they have their bats?
Right.
Do they have their gloves? They're a threat.
Right. So let's talk about some of your good teams. Obviously 89 was the magical year, but you had some teams before that were really good. And I think about the 87 team that went to the final that year and fell a little short, but that was a great run by that 87 team.
I'm sorry, it wouldn't have been the 89 team, but the 90 team.
Yeah, I always get that confused because of that. Yep.
The first year was a kind of an odd year. I came in 78. We had 5 seniors on the team. And we had some talent there, and we had some talent in the senior class, but we also had it in the underclassmen. Jim didn't leave the cupboard bare, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And we just got kind of fortunate in 78. We go in the tournament, we win 4 games in a row, and we get to the state finals.
Right. That's a great first year.
First year we get to the state finals. The one thing I'll remember about that is we had a unbelievable stud pitcher who went on to be a professional athlete, which everyone knows around here. His name was Sandy Olszewski.
Yes.
A 6'5" righty that could throw BBs and was an All-American high school quarterback, and who later went to Arizona State and played quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was pitching in the state championship game. I felt very good that we were going to win it. And in the first inning, he throws a pitch, and he severely pulls his groin. I have to take him out of the game. Our other pitcher, who was also an excellent pitcher, Johnny Petruzzello, pitched in the semis. He was out. So we had to pitch the rest of the game with our third pitcher, who was not going to be at that level.
Right.
And it deflated our team terribly. So we end up losing to Farmington that day. Not only did we lose Sandy as our stud pitcher, but he was also our best hitter. He was our fourth hitter.
He was a great athlete.
Just a great athlete. So we kind of caught a bad break there, but that's what happened in that 78 team.
Right. And, I'm sure being your first year, you were young as well, but I'm sure people probably told you, great first year and don't worry about it. You'll be back there. But in a sport like that, you don't know if you're ever going to be back there because, it's so hard. When it's a tournament, it's very hard to get back there every year.
Baseball, I'm going to tell you right now, I know a lot of the coaches have told me, the veteran coaches, some of their best teams were knocked out of the tournament early, and then they had some other teams that just got on a run and things just went well. It's just your better teams sometimes don't win it, but it's just the way the game is. There's too many variables.
Right. So let's fast forward a little bit, and we'll talk about some other teams, but talk about the 1990 team because, that's an interesting year because the reason I had mentioned 89, I always get them confused, but the 89 football team had an unbelievable run, and one of the best players on your championship team, Kevin Sharkey, was a phenomenal football player. So Ansonia has this big run, and then you guys later that spring cap it off with that magical run. Talk about that 1990 team a little bit. I think you had Eddie Tedosio, who was a big-time player.
The 90 team, which I felt, the NVL is a solid baseball league. I felt that we were, talent-wise, the best team in the league. But we were decimated with injuries the entire year. It was outrageous to go through the lineup, how many people were injured. It was just mind-boggling. Then we get into the tournament, we're 12-8.
Right.
I know we're not 12-8. We're better than that. So I get a little emotional talking about that.
Yeah.
We get in the tournament, and we just got on a roll.
Right.
And our pitchers were outstanding. 2 pitchers, Keith Pelletowski and Corey Tomasella.
Yes. Yep. And Keith went on to do great things as well.
Well, the first game we won 7-1 against Griswold on the road. The second game, we faced the number 1 team in our division. We were in our class. We were S that year. Was Tullerlot, which is way up by Putnam, and they were number 1. And we pitched Keith against them. We beat them 13-1. And after the game, the coach told me we never saw a pitcher like that.
Right.
He had 12 strikeouts. He was just dominant. And then I'm trying to think. And then in the quarterfinals, we played Coggins, and
it was always a good team.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're tough, that Shoreline. And we came in with at that time we came back with we actually pitched with a combination that game. And then we went to the semis. Corey Tomasella pitched a shutout in the semis, and we beat Gilbert, a very good baseball team, 4-0.
Right.
And then we end up going to the finals, playing East Granby, which is a league up by Hartford.
Right.
And Keith pitches another shutout, and we win 1-0.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So in the tournament, in 5 games, we gave up 1 run in the first game. We gave up 1 run in the second game. We won the third game 3-2 and shut out 4 and 5. So in 5 games, we gave up 4 runs.
Right, which is remarkable.
And so they were just on a mission.
What was that final out like for you when you saw the final out and it hits you, we're state champions, because anybody that coaches, they love the game, but you want to win a championship. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. What was the feeling like as you just sat there and took it all in?
I don't know. I'm too emotional to talk about it.
Yeah.
I flash back to it. Seniors were unbelievable.
Yeah, they really were.
2 things I remember. They shaved my number in their head, on their hair. 44.
Oh, wow. And that has to make you feel good as a coach. Definitely does. That team really, like you said, they were decimated with injuries all year. So to see them go with all those injuries and then come back and win, it had to be a great moment.
They deserved it.
Right.
I'll never forget them.
Right. And what's crazy, Coach, is, again, that's a town that's known for football. So sometimes it's unfortunate, but kids don't seem to have that passion for the other sports like they do for a sport like that's so popular in that town. But these kids, like I said, guys like Kevin Sharkey, Pelotowski, Teodosio, these guys loved baseball, and I mean, they loved their town.
Well, we've always had that mixture. It just seems that way. We've always had a good group that also play football, and then we have that other group that are just baseball players, and we put them together, and it works well. But the top athletes, they play more than one sport. When you're talking about Keith Pelotowski and you're talking about Kevin Sharkey, you're talking about elite athletes.
Right.
And Keith Pelotowski was, we knew those kind of athletes were going to go on from high school and play at the next level. Keith Pelotowski was Yale's number one pitcher.
Right.
He was an all-Ivy pitcher. And he was the quarterback on the football team, won the state championship, and he was the pitcher on the baseball team, won a state championship. And he went on and played in the minor leagues, played double-A ball.
Right.
And I remember one day I get a phone call. I was laying in bed. It was whatever time it was, I don't know. And it was Keith on his cell phone. And he says, guess where I am? I said, where are you, Keith? He said, I'm on the mound at Wrigley Stadium, Wrigley Field.
Wow.
I'm trying out for the Cubs. And they selected him, and he played in their minor league system.
And just the fact that he got to pitch on that mound, whether he, that right there is, something that you'll remember forever, because that's a legendary field.
No doubt about it. It just blew me away. And then Kevin Sharkey, when I can talk about him, he was an elite athlete. He was a tremendous running back for the football team. And for us, he was a 3-year starter. He was our second baseman. And as a senior, he became the best pitcher in the NVL. And he went on to play at Brown University. And he was a running back and played for them. To this day, when I talk to Kevin, he wished that he had played both sports at Brown because I felt he was a professional baseball player, but that didn't transpire. But if you notice, the two boys I just mentioned, they were not only elite athletes, but they're Ivy League students.
Yes, yep, very smart men. Yep. Another team, Coach, that you took to the finals, and you just lost your best pitcher in Jason Andraco. He had graduated. But the 96 team that went to the finals, I think you had Jeff Gregorio as your catcher. Stephen Coughlin, I believe, played center field for you. I mean, you had so many good players on that team. Talk about that team a little bit.
All right. The 96 team probably physically was the most talented team that we've ever had.
Right.
They had athletes all over the place. Physically, size-wise, they were, I've never seen a baseball team anywhere as big as that. The legendary coach at Eastern Connecticut, Bill Halawadi, was recruiting some of our players, and he told me after one of the games in the tournament that he was there, he said he never saw a team that big ever, any place.
Right.
Just to give you an idea on the size of the players that we had, our first baseman was Jim Froelich.
Yep.
He was 6'4".
Right.
Our third baseman was Luke Richmond.
He was like 6'5".
He was 6'4", 6'5". Our center fielder was Stephen Coughlin. He was 6'4", 6'5".
Right.
Our number one pitcher was Pat Lynch. He was 6'6".
Yes.
Jay Lightham was our other pitcher. He was like 6'2". It was just a massive team. And, of course, you had a catcher like Jeff Gregorio
and he could put the ball over the fence with the best of them.
He was.
Yeah.
I mean, that team there, I felt bad. We went right through the tournament, and we got to the state finals. We played a solid. We were Class M that year.
Right.
It was in Palmer Field at Middletown. We played East Catholic. I remember it was in the 90s. It was a hot day.
And it was right before, I think, Derby played their Class S game. Yeah.
And we didn't have our best game, but I thought we were a better team than them, but we didn't win the game. But talent-wise, that was some team. Jeff Gregorio went on to be
at Penn, correct?
Went to Penn. He was the all-Ivy catcher at Penn.
Yeah.
Pat Lynch went to Quinnipiac, and he went on to become the all-league pitcher. Luke Richmond went on to become the quarterback at UConn.
Right.
Jay Lightham went on to pitch for Eastern Connecticut. Stephen Coughlin went on to be the tight end for Stanford University. Jim Froelich went on to be a football player at UConn. Are you kidding me?
Right.
I mean, you're talking
that's
about
a coach's dream.
You're talking
right there.
about that many collegiate athletes. I mean, on one high school team. Right now, the statistics say that on a high school level, that 4% of the players will play at the next level, whether Division 1, 2, 3, or NAIA. And we had that many on that one team.
Right.
That was just a special team.
Right. And, you brought up Jason Lightham, and his brother, Steven, was an outstanding pitcher for you as well. Steven, I remember him in Little League and Babe Ruth, just a talented player as well. And, I mean, Derby's loss was Ansonia's gain because you were able to get the Lighthams. They had moved to Ansonia.
Well, actually, we lucked out on both of those because we had Steve Lightham, then we got Jay Lightham, and Jeff Gregorio lived in Derby too for a while.
He did, yeah, and his brother Jim went to Derby. So I mean, you really did.
Just the way things are because you're so close. But that was Steve. Both the Lightham boys were good pitchers, and they were solid players, no doubt about that.
Right. Coach, who are some of it's hard to remember in a 40-year career, but who are some of the special players? You just brought up these guys, but who else would you say, pitchers, hitters that you really, when you coached were special players for you?
Wow. Well, there's so many. I wouldn't want to leave anybody out. I would say some names that are just popping into my head. One boy that we still keep in correspondence when he's a teacher in Florida. I get emotional when I think about
it's fine. Believe me. Trust me. I mean, shows you have the passion for the game and the kids.
He graduated in '86. His name was Brian Donovan.
Okay. Yep. Very good player. Yeah.
All-stater. Played at the University of Massachusetts and started for us for 3 years. No one had the passion for the game more than him.
Right.
No one.
Right.
Then we had a player that graduated in 1983. I'm going back and forth with years.
That's fine. Not a problem.
One of the best hitters we ever had, first baseman, all-stater. He has the distinction of being, to my knowledge, he's one boy that excelled, just like Stephen Coughlin did, in 3 sports. He was an all-stater in football, he was an all-stater in baseball, and he was an outstanding all-NVL player in basketball. His name was Gordy Hotchkiss.
Oh, yeah. You hear about him a lot. Yeah.
He graduated in '83. He's a sheriff now in the state of Kentucky, and he could just hit. He could flat out hit. He was a tremendous first baseman. He also went to the University of Pennsylvania and became all-Ivy and led them to the Sweet 16 in the tournament. He was that good.
Right.
He would have been a professional baseball player, but he got a severe injury to his knee, and that kind of stopped his career. But Gordy was some player. I remember when the Ivy League schools were recruiting Jeff Gregorio, and he really wanted to go to Yale, but the Penn coach was on him constantly, and when I called the coach up, he said to me, he asked me, was he in the mold of Gordy Hotchkiss? And I said, he was.
Right.
And he said, I don't even have to see him. We want him.
Wow, so that's pretty...
Anything like Gordy Hotchkiss, we want him.
Right.
I'm going back, in the 80s, another player probably had lightning in his arm as much as anyone that we've had. He could throw the ball 90 miles an hour. He was another one of those tremendous two-sport athletes, all-state football, all-state baseball, 1989. His name was David D'Onofrio.
Yes, yeah.
He had a rocket arm. He could just throw the baseball. He pitched for us his freshman year. He pitched some varsity, sophomore year, junior year. And his junior year, I remember he pitched up here at Nolan Field in front of a big crowd against Watertown. The premier player in the state that year was a kid from Watertown, Rico Brogna, who was drafted in the first round by the Detroit Tigers.
Right.
And to this day, Rico said the best pitcher he ever faced in high school baseball was Dave D'Onofrio. And Dave was some pitcher. His senior year, unfortunately, he hurt his arm. He ended up going to Miami-Dade, a baseball junior college powerhouse, and then he went on playing for Porky Vieira at the UNH. But he never could pitch anymore because of his arm. So he was a great hitter and a great athlete. He played outfield.
Right.
But while Brian Donovan had that passion, Dave D'Onofrio was like an animal. He was so aggressive.
Right.
He's someone that I had to calm down. It was like he was just wild. He just was so aggressive. And I like those kind of players rather than ones you have to fire up.
Right.
I would rather have that kind. There's so many. I mean, I'm thinking of those are the people that just come onto my mind.
Right. And you're not going to be able to, mention everybody at the top of your head, but, anybody that's played for you definitely understands how much you appreciated them. So let's talk. I mean,
I wanted to tell you also in the 18, like we said, the 78 team was able to go to the finals. And then we also were able to go to the finals with you mentioned it earlier, the 87 team.
That was a very good team.
The 87 team, we had a catcher, Brent Harvey, who was an outstanding catcher. And we also had a big-time pitcher, 6'5", Michael Shortle.
Yes.
And that team won the NVL championship. And we lost in the state finals 2-1 to Chippewa Valley, and I won't ever forget that. They had a man on first base, they had a nobody on base, and they called a catcher's interference on the batter. So the batter went to first base. The next kid hits a triple. And we get beat 2-1, and I still, wasn't too sure about that catcher's interference, but. We had Brent Harvey. We had Michael Shortle. That was a solid team, the 87 team. And then you mentioned about the 90 team winning it all and the 96 team also going to the finals.
You know what's interesting? You brought up Brent Harvey. He would go on to, be a very good hockey player. He got drafted, I believe, by the Flyers, one of those teams I remember. This kid was just a gifted athlete all around the, board. And I mean, Ansonia, like I said, they get known for their football a lot, but they've produced so many great athletes in every sport.
Well, Brent Harvey is there's another one. He's an all-state football player. He's an all-state baseball player, but his best sport was hockey.
Right.
And Ansonia doesn't have hockey.
No.
And I appreciate that, and so does the football coaches, that he didn't decide to go to some private school and play hockey because we wouldn't have had him.
Right.
And he just played. He did continue to play his hockey, and that's the way it worked out. But he was a gifted athlete also.
Right. So, Coach, let me ask you, you just won 500 games. When you won your 300th game, that had to be quite the milestone. But, I mean, what does 500 mean to you? I mean, it's a great milestone, but I think it just means more to you that the fact that you've coached great kids over the years, and they've all attributed it to that.
Actually, the 500 to me only means that I've had a long line of hardworking, dedicated baseball players and assistant coaches.
Right.
It's always been about the players and the assistant coaches.
Right.
It's always been about them.
Right. And, I mean, it had to be special. It was a tough season this year. You guys fell a little short of the tournament. But, I mean, the positive was you won that 500th game. And, I mean, your players were really pushing for that. I know a lot of them, just talking to them, they really said, we're going to be disappointed if he doesn't get it with our class. And that was a good group of kids. I mean, like I said, they fell a little short, but they're a good group of kids, so it had to be special to win that 500th game with that group.
Absolutely. We had 4 seniors. We started practice on March 13th. We went to the end of May, and we practice or play 6 days a week. We give them off Sunday, but we go 6 days. And those 4, perfect attendance, never missed once.
Right.
And they were all captains. We had John Bucci, one of our pitchers, Jordan Jones, who was our shortstop, Pat Palmer, who was our catcher, and Bryson Cafaro, who was our pitcher and first baseman. And Bryson and Pat are excellent players. They are going to go on and play at the next level. Bryson has a baseball scholarship at Fairfield University, and believe me, they have a solid player there. There's another one of those athletes, gifted athletes. He's quarterback of the state championship football team. And I'll tell you, in baseball, I just called the Fairfield coach up. This is ironic. This week, I just called him up. And I know he recruited him as a left-handed pitcher, but he is an unbelievable first baseman. He comes up with everything. He is like a golden glove over there, and he also is a great hitter, and he's tremendous base stealer. He was 17 for 17. So he thanked me, and he said in the fall he does have a couple of boys that play multiple positions, and he said even though it's Division I, that he's going to see what he looks like at first. I know he's going to like him there, and he also can pitch because he's a lefty pitcher, and they love that. And Pat is going to the University of Bridgeport, which is a high-level Division II school, and he can just flat-out hit. He's a catcher that with a strong arm, real nice body, big, strong 6'2", well-developed, but he could just hit. He's just one of those guys that can just flat-out hit.
Right.
And matter of fact, this year he had in all the years we've been keeping the stats of high school baseball, going back to the early 70s, he has the second highest batting average ever in the history of Ansonia high school baseball.
Wow.
He batted this year .508.
That's tremendous.
And we played only 28 games. I'm sorry, only 20 games. He drove in 28 runs, 28 RBIs. An unbelievable year for both those boys. Let me tell you, Bryson and Pat are solid players, but they're also great kids.
Right, definitely. Coach, let me ask you this. Let's try to get a little humor in here. How has your relationship been over the years with the umpires? Because I know sometimes umpires, they could, be a little difficult, but, at the same time, they're trying to do the best they can. Well, how would you say you've had it? Because you seem to, one thing I've noticed about you is you'll argue with the umpire, but you'll say what you have to say, and then you're done with it. You don't let it dwell. I mean, how has your relationship been with the umpires?
Well, down through the years, I would say I probably mellowed a little bit. In the beginning, my aggressiveness, I would carry it pretty much.
Did you ever get ejected ever? Or?
Well, I was just going to mention that. It was only one time, and it's an ironic thing, that the game that was the 500th victory was the place that I was ejected at the only time.
Wow.
Which was up in Torrington at Fushnick Park. And if it happened today, I would get ejected again because he was safe at second base by 5 feet. It wasn't even close. And at the end of the game, the other coach told me, he said he was safe by a mile.
Right.
So I just went out there, I argued, and he threw me out. But now, it doesn't do you any good because you go out there, you can argue a little bit, and then you had your say, and that's the end of it. But if you carry it on, it's not going to do any good. And now they have new policies in place, which they didn't have then. Now, if you get ejected, you're kind of like put on a blacklist, if you know what I mean. But they do have a warning system. They do warn you and so on. It only happened to me one time in those 40 years. Recently, I would say in the last 20 years, there hasn't ever been anything close. It's just I went out, said what I had to say, and then that was the end of it.
Right.
But now they have these rules where you even have to have total control over your assistant coaches, which is really difficult to do. Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes I think the umpires realize that. But we have some really good umpires around here. I mean, really high-level umpires that also do college games. So they come and they give you the best effort. They're really good. They're not there, believe me, for the money. They don't get paid really a lot of money to do that job for what they do. So we appreciate them. And after every game, win or lose, our policy is every year, we shake both umpires' hands and we thank them for coming to the game one way or the other, whether we're home or away. Whether we lose or we do not, or we win, it's not a factor.
Right. Now, Coach, we've talked about you've been coaching 40 years. How do you base things each season now? Do you take it as if I feel good, I'll come back the next year, or do you have no plans of ever leaving? Like, I mean, it seems like this is in your blood and you want to continue to do this.
I think I'm okay physically right now, but you never know. But that's something where all the veteran coaches tell me that you'll know when it's time.
Right.
You just get a feeling.
Right.
And that's it.
Right. And you're still loving it, though. I mean, you still love coming to, the games. You still love coming to practice, doing the interaction. And I mean,
I'll be honest with you. There's certain things that I don't love.
Right.
I don't love dealing with the spring weather that we have and all these indoor practices, which
has gotten worse and worse.
I know every coach talks about it. I mean, you got to be kidding me. This year here was a classic example. We open up the first game. We get usually between 12 and 14 days to practice before the first game. So what happens is we open up with Woodland this year at Nolan Field. We played home game. We never practiced one time on that diamond before the first game. Every practice was indoors except for 2 scrimmages. We scrimmaged North Haven and we scrimmaged Amity. Right. And that was it. And so I just felt it was unfair. And I'm not too happy about the equipment doing that. But I'll tell you right now, dealing with the players and dealing with the assistant coaches and competing against the other teams, that's what I love.
Right. Coach, before we wrap it up, what message would you send to anybody who's starting out as a coach right now? I look at Seymour's coach. He's in his second year. He's doing a great job. But what kind of message would you send to those guys who want to get involved with coaching?
Well, you mentioned Jeff. I told him he did an outstanding job this year, and I called him up after that big upset against East Catholic. Just go with the passion. If you have the passion, those are the kind of people that you know are going to last. They're not going to be those 2-3 year coaches and then they're gone. They're going to have the passion. They're going to stay there. They're going to try to work their family life around it, which is difficult. That's a very difficult thing to do. And just give it everything you have. Give it to the players, and they'll give it back to you.
Well, Coach, this has been a lot of fun, and it's hard to believe we already got an hour in, and we'll have to do it again sometime, but I really do applaud you. I mean, I think of the great people that have coached in high school sports. I think of Charlie DeCenzo, Paul Sponheimer, Jack Hunt, Bill McAllister, Joe Benanto, John DeFrancisco, and you're right there with them. I mean, for what you've done with that program and those kids for all those 40 years. I really do applaud you, and I really do appreciate you coming on today.
Well, I thank you for having me. I'm not in the class of the gentleman you just mentioned.
Oh, you definitely are.
But
Trust
I'm
me.
happy to be here, and I always am proud of Ansonia baseball.
Well, I thank you again for coming on, and it was a real honor. So thank you again.
Thank you. I'm sorry it was a little emotional.
No
but I
problem.
can't
We
do
like
anything
that.
about that.
And that was the legendary coach of Ansonia baseball, Mr. Mike Vacca. And folks, anybody that wins 500 games, that's not by accident. It's not just about the wins. It's also about the commitment, the dedication, and the love he has for his players. And, you know, Coach Vacca is somebody that's really good for high school sports. And before we go, folks, the Valley lost a very good friend this past week in Jimmy Walsh. Jimmy and his brother Jack for years coached, you know, Kasdan softball. They ran basketball leagues in Derby. They were inseparable. You know, anytime you saw them around town, you referred to them as twin. And it was a tough loss for the Valley. And I just want to say, you know, that we'll miss Jim Walsh. And I wanted to mention that. And rest in peace, Jimmy Walsh. For Valley Sports Rewind, I'm Mike Cannici saying goodbye, everyone.